My name is Sarah, and on a cold night in December of 2024, I had a near-death experience where I firmly believe Jesus himself showed me the dangers of technology in my generation. If you are a parent or have young people in your family, please listen to this warning. I didn't even believe in this kind of thing before that life-changing night, but now I'm here, sharing my story to warn as many people as possible. Please comment below whether you agree or disagree, or if you've experienced something similar. Here's what happened. It was a normal Friday night. I was lying on the couch in our living room, endlessly scrolling through my phone, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, trapped in a cycle of content that didn't seem to mean much, but somehow had me hooked. Hours passed without me realizing it. My parents had gone to bed, my siblings were in their rooms, and I was alone with the glow of my screen. A strange dizziness came over me, like the room was spinning. I thought maybe I'd stared at the screen for too long, or that my blood sugar was low. I decided to get up and grab some water, but before I could move, everything went black. The next thing I knew, I wasn't in my living room anymore. I was floating above my body, staring down at myself, slumped over on the couch, phone still glowing in my hand. Panic and confusion overwhelmed me. Was I dead? What was happening? I tried to cry out, but no sound came. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room, cutting through the darkness. I turned, and there he was. Jesus, he didn't look like the paintings or pictures I'd seen before. He was more radiant, more powerful, and more real than anything I'd ever known. His presence was light, love, and authority all at once. I wanted to fall to my knees, but I couldn't move. "Come," he said, extending his hand toward me. His voice was calm, but carried a weight that left no room for argument. Without hesitation, I reached out and took his hand. The moment I did, the room disappeared, and we were standing in a void. But it wasn't empty. All around us were glowing screens, phones, tablets, computers, TVs, VR headsets. They weren't just devices, they were alive with something dark and sinister. Faces stared back at me from those screens, millions of them, but their eyes were blank, hypnotized. Jesus gestured toward the screens. "This is the battlefield," he said, his voice filled with sorrow and urgency. "The enemy has made this his primary weapon against your generation, millennials, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha. He knows your potential and what you could accomplish for my kingdom, so he is working to destroy you." I was confused. But how? It's just technology. It's just entertainment. Jesus turned to me, and I'll never forget the sadness in his eyes. "It had started that way," he said, "but what you see as harmless is far from it. The enemy uses these screens to enslave hearts, minds, and souls. Technology was meant to be a tool, but it has become a trap." I looked closer at the screens and saw chains extending from them. The chains wrapped around people's wrists, necks, and even their hearts. Some people were shackled so tightly they could barely move. Each chain had a word written on it: comparison, anxiety, lust, distraction, pride, envy. The words burned into my mind. "They don't even know they're chained," I whispered. "That's the enemy's greatest trick," Jesus replied, "to enslave them without their knowledge." The screen suddenly turned red, flames flickering at the edges. A terrifying symbol glowed on every screen. It wasn't just on the devices, though. It began to appear on people's foreheads and hands as if being burned into their skin. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It is not yet the mark of the beast," Jesus said, "but it is conditioning them to accept it. The enemy is preparing their hearts to worship him instead of me. They are being trained to value convenience, approval, and instant gratification above all else. When the time comes, they will accept the mark without question." I couldn't breathe. I thought about the hours I'd spent staring at my phone, the times I'd felt worthless because of what I saw online, the arguments I'd had with my parents when they told me to put my phone down. I'd thought they were overreacting. Now, I wasn't so sure. The scene shifted. I was standing in a massive war zone. It wasn't a battlefield with guns and soldiers, but a spiritual one. Families, parents, grandparents, children, teens stood on opposite sides yelling at each other. The older generations accused the younger of being lazy and addicted. The younger generations blamed the older ones for creating the very problems they faced. Meanwhile, the enemy stood in the shadows, laughing as he sowed division. "They are supposed to be united," Jesus said, his voice heavy with sadness, "but the enemy has turned them against each other. The older generations must wake up and see that their children and grandchildren are under attack. They must fight for them, not against them." "How?" I asked. "What can they do?" "They must pray," Jesus said. "They must teach my word. They must set an example by putting me above all else, even their own distractions." I looked around and saw older people glued to their phones too, scrolling through news or playing games while their children wandered into the darkness. The next thing I saw broke my heart. It was a church service, but most people weren't paying attention. Some scrolled on their phones during worship, others took selfies during the sermon. The pastor preached passionately, but his words fell on deaf ears. The glow of screens filled the room, drowning out the presence of God. "This is my house," Jesus said, his voice trembling with anger and sorrow. "But it has become a marketplace for distractions. My people no longer seek me with their whole hearts. They seek entertainment, validation, and convenience." I turned to Jesus, desperate. "What can I do? I'm just a kid." Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. "You are more than you think you are. You are my messenger. I have chosen you to warn them, not just your generation, but all generations." "But they won't listen," I said, tears streaming down my face. "They'll think I'm crazy." "They rejected me too," he said. "But some will hear, and their eyes will be opened. Speak boldly, tell them what you have seen. Warn them that the time is short." In an instant, I was back in my living room, my heart pounding, tears streaming down my face. My phone was still in my hand, but it felt cold, heavy, and sinister. I threw it across the room and fell to my knees, crying out to God. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prayed like never before. For my friends, my family, my generation, and even the older generations. I prayed for the courage to share what I'd seen. If you're reading this, I believe it's because Jesus wants you to hear this warning. This isn't just about kids and their phones, it's about all of us. The enemy is using technology to distract, divide, and destroy. He's conditioning us to accept what's coming. If we don't wake up, it will be too late. Parents, grandparents, older friends, you have a role to play. Pray for your children and grandchildren. Talk to them about these things. Set an example by putting down your own devices and seeking God first. And to my generation, don't let the enemy steal your soul through a screen. Seek Jesus. Read his word. Find your worth in him, not in likes, comments, or followers. The time is short. The choice is yours.